The Invisible Man. The snow fell thick and fast, driven by a bitter wind that howled through the Sussex downs, blanketing the village of Iping in a silent, heavy coat of white. Through the swirling storm, a figure appeared, a stranger wrapped from head to toe against the elements and prying eyes. Every inch of him was covered, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a thick coat buttoned to his chin, and bandages that hid his entire face, save for a single, unnervingly fake-looking pink nose. He burst into the warm, lamplit glow of the Coach and Horses Inn, and the comfortable murmur of conversation stopped dead. Every patron turned to stare at the monstrous apparition in the doorway. The innkeeper, a practical woman named Mrs. Hall, showed him to a room, trying to ignore his brusque manner. The stranger was short-tempered, reclusive, and demanded to be left entirely alone. For days he remained locked away, a mystery behind a bolted door. Soon, large crates began to arrive for him, filled with hundreds of bottles of strange chemicals, intricate scientific equipment, and stacks of arcane books. The only signs of his existence were the sounds of clinking glass, sudden crashes, and muttered curses that echoed from his room at all hours. Weeks turned into a month, and Mrs. Hall's patience wore thin. The stranger was far behind on his rent. The village was buzzing with fearful gossip, and his room, she suspected, was an absolute disaster. "I must know what you're doing in there," she declared, standing firm at his door one afternoon. "This is my inn, not a laboratory, and I must see the color of your money." The stranger turned slowly from his work, his bandaged head seeming to radiate a palpable, silent anger. "You don't understand what I've been through," he suddenly roared, his voice muffled and distorted by the layers of wrappings. "The solitude, the endless experiments, the things I've had to endure to achieve my goal." He took a menacing step towards her, his gloved hands clenched into fists. "You want to see who I am? Are you so sure you really want to see?" Mrs. Hall stood her ground out of sheer stubbornness, but a cold shiver of genuine fear ran down her spine. With a furious, inhuman cry, he ripped at his face. The fake nose flew across the room and bounced off the wall. He unwound the bandages with frantic, desperate speed, letting them fall in a heap on the floor. Mrs. Hall gasped, bracing herself to see a scarred or horribly disfigured face. But she saw something far worse, something impossible. She saw nothing at all. Beneath the last of the bandages was an empty space, a perfect void where a head and face should be. The stranger, now free of his suffocating disguise, was an invisible force of pure chaos. He laughed, a chilling, disembodied sound that echoed through the inn. "Free!" the voice cried. He threw furniture as if it were weightless, smashed every glass and bottle behind the bar, and sent the terrified villagers of Iping fleeing and screaming into the snow. He was powerful, he was free, and he was completely, terrifyingly invisible. Miles away, in the quiet, respectable town of Burdock, a scientist named Dr. Kemp worked late in his orderly study. He was a calm, rational man, a man who believed only in what science could prove. As he read a scientific journal, he was startled by a noise from downstairs, the distinct, sharp crack of a window latch being forced open. He froze, setting his book down, every nerve on alert as he listened to the unnatural silence that followed. Holding a heavy poker, Kemp crept downstairs. He found the dining room window wide open, the curtains blowing wildly in the cold night air. He saw nothing out of place, but then he heard a sudden, muffled sneeze from the hallway. He turned and saw, with a jolt of utter disbelief, a series of wet, bloody footprints appearing one by one out of thin air on the light-colored rug, leading directly up the stairs towards his study. Back in his study, a voice spoke from the shadows, weary and strained. "Good evening, Kemp." Dr. Kemp spun around, his heart pounding against his ribs. The large armchair by the fire was empty, but the cushions were deeply indented, as if someone were sitting there. "For God's sake, Kemp, give me a drink," the voice said. "Don't you recognize my voice?" "It's me, Griffin, from the university." The Invisible Man was Kemp's old classmate, a brilliant but dangerously ambitious and unstable student named Griffin. Exhausted and bleeding, Griffin told Kemp everything. He had become obsessed with a single idea, using physics to alter the refractive index of living tissue until it became invisible. He had worked for years in a grimy, forgotten London apartment, neglecting his health, his sanity, and every person in his life. "I found the formula, Kemp. I finally found it. I tested it on a neighbor's cat first, then on myself." In a vivid flashback, Griffin described the terrifying, painful sensation of drinking the glowing liquid. He felt his body become as cold and transparent as glass. He watched in a state of shock and awe as his own hands faded to nothing, his reflection vanishing completely from the mirror before him. The transformation was a scientific triumph, but a human disaster. He was trapped. He couldn't find a way to become visible again. In a fit of panic, needing to cover his tracks and escape his suspicious landlord, he had set fire to the entire building, leaving his research and his old life to burn. He was now a ghost in the modern world, forced to wander unseen, constantly cold, hungry, and dangerously alone with his own dark thoughts. "But now, I have a plan," Griffin's voice hissed from the armchair, filled with a newfound madness. "With my invisibility, I am a god. I can take what I want, go where I want, punish who I want. I will start a reign of terror, Kemp. The world will fear my name. And you, my old friend, you will be my visible partner." Kemp was horrified beyond words. Griffin wasn't just ambitious. He was completely insane, a monster of his own creation. He knew he had to stop him, no matter the risk. Pretending to agree with the mad plan, Kemp sat at his desk and offered Griffin food and rest. While Griffin boasted about his future crimes, Kemp's hand moved secretly below the desk, scribbling a desperate, urgent note to the chief of police. The chief of police, Colonel Addy, a man of action, read Kemp's note with a grim, determined expression. He understood the impossible threat immediately. He gathered his best men. They moved silently through the pre-dawn streets, taking up positions around Kemp's house, armed with revolvers and heavy clubs. They were going to trap the invisible monster. Griffin's paranoid senses picked up the faint sounds of men outside. He realized Kemp's betrayal instantly. With a roar of pure fury, he smashed through the thick glass of the study window. The glass exploded outwards in a deadly shower. Kemp and Colonel Addy, who had just entered the room, were thrown violently to the floor by the sheer, unstoppable force of the Invisible Man's escape. "Kemp, I will kill you for this." Griffin's disembodied voice echoed through the town, a promise of death that every citizen heard. "I will hunt you down. You are the first man on my list of those who will die." The official manhunt for the Invisible Man had begun, but in reality, it was the Invisible Man who was doing the hunting. Kemp fled for his life, his heart hammering in his chest. He ran blindly through the streets of Burdock, knowing the invisible killer was right behind him, toying with him. An iron crowbar, seemingly thrown from nowhere, shattered the door of a shop just where he had been standing. He could feel Griffin's cold breath on his neck, hear his taunting, insane laughter all around him. Kemp stumbled and fell hard on the cobblestones. He saw a group of burly workmen ahead and screamed with his last ounce of strength, "He's here!" The Invisible Man. "Stop him!" A large, brave navvy, seeing Kemp's terror, swung a heavy spade into the empty air where the doctor was pointing. It connected with a sickening thud and a cry of pain. The air shimmered, and a desperate struggle began as the workmen piled onto the unseen, flailing figure. The fight was brutal, chaotic, and short. The Invisible Man, weakened by his ordeal, was overwhelmed by sheer numbers. He lay on the cobblestones, his unseen chest struggling for breath. As the life finally left him, a strange and miraculous thing happened. Slowly, like a photograph developing in fluid, his body began to reappear. the nerves, the arteries, the bones, the flesh, until at last a man lay dead on the street, a pale albino man with white hair and a face twisted forever in anger and despair. The reign of terror was over.